I wanted to tell all of y'all how important this work is. Dan just mentioned that right now data might be, and on climate change may be some of the most vulnerable data out there, and it's work that we really need to safeguard as we try to move forward because the weather's getting wacky. So before we start the panel, I wanted to really mention a little bit about I've gotten involved in this task force fairly early on after the MOU was signed, because I am currently president of COPRI, one of ASCE's institutes. That's Coasts, Oceans, Ports, and Rivers. And we had the opportunity, the three presidents at the time of the institutes that were at the early on involved, before GI got involved, to go to the opening of the industry proving grounds in Asheville, North Carolina. And so we had gotten to know some of the NOAA folks pretty well by then, got to see their facilities in Asheville, and I can remember back in, when was that? Brian, do you remember, Bilal, what year, the proving, when we went to Asheville? It was early 23? Right, it was 24, I think. 24. So it was early on in 24. And I can remember some of the NOAA folks saying that, you know, it was a lovely facility. And I'll never forget, someone said, we're situated in North Carolina in Asheville, and we're safe from climate change. So fast forward a little bit further along into the year, and we are in Tampa. ASCE has the convention. No, it didn't, because we had Hurricane Milton. Not an uncommon occurrence in a city that sits in Florida on the coast, right? So it's a risk that you know you're taking when you hold an event on a coastal city and it's hurricane season and there's a hurricane risk. But then later on, I see that a second hurricane followed rapidly on Milton's heels, Hurricane Helene. And North Carolina, Asheville, is nowhere near the coast. But I have colleagues now that I've come to respect and know, and they're evacuating. And it really impacted me because I can remember almost 20 years ago, I had to evacuate my not yet a coastal city of New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina. So I know how it feels to be a refugee, an evacuee. So I reached out to them and said, hey, how are you? Where are you? And I'll never forget how ironic it was, a response that I got back from Joe Pica. He said, I'm staying with my brother in Tampa, where I'm safe. For now, anyway. So there you go. The weather is wacky. So how can we get better at providing communities with more resilient infrastructure? Because it's often, you know, you're playing Russian roulette, but it's not just if, it's just when something's going to happen. Whether it's in a big event or, what Sissy mentioned, all of these little death by 1,000 cuts kind of events that happen at communities, to communities that don't rise to the level of, well, I'm not sure if we're going to have FEMA and the ability to get support for our communities for the biggies. So I know I have a set of slides. They're there. Oh, thank you. So this is session 5. So welcome to the last session of this workshop. And the title is Synthesis, Working Together for Resilient Infrastructure Development. So a little bit about that MOU, and I know Bilal covered this yesterday at the beginning, but the MOU was signed between ASCE and NOAA, and also the boundary organization, the University of Maryland. That was done in early February of 23. It's scheduled to end in February of 28. And the boundary organization, UMD, is going to have a deadline of, it's August of this year. Yes, so coming up. Next slide. So a little bit about the overarching MOU purposes. So it was initially an MOU that was ASCE, NOAA. So how do we improve cooperation? So it's really all about climate information, climate services that can be provided to the professionals that ASCE represents, those engineers that design, build, operate, maintain infrastructure, because we want them to be more client resistant. And how can that facilitation be better documented and updated in the publishing of standards, of manuals of practice, and of educational content? So how can we better facilitate those efforts of ASCE when it comes to climate information? So next slide. So this was set upon in the MOU as far as ASCE's responsibilities go. So to assist NOAA in identifying just what science, just what data, and what services do we need. How can we assist in communicating to our membership and to others in the community that rely on this technical information? And how can we act as a conduit for that information? Both ways. So next slide. So NOAA's responsibilities per the MOU include how they update and disseminate that type of information. How is it made accessible? And also how to identify new opportunities. And I think that we've seen in this task force, because the task force meets monthly. For those of you new to this, the task force meets monthly. And what I've seen in these monthly calls is an increase in the federal agencies and those folks that represent other agencies, such as NIST, such as FEMA, USGS, USACE, NASA. So those folks are also coming to the table under this umbrella, talking about what are your needs, what are the services, what's the information that we have, what's critical, and how can we better connect, move forward, so that we can all together provide the American people with infrastructure that's more resilient. Now we have today, next slide, I'm not quite finished. So the joint responsibilities was, and this is, I think, critical for, I guess, some nuts and bolts. So one of those responsibilities was an annual meeting. You're sitting here as part of one. So then how to jointly develop outreach materials, educational materials. We have a newsletter. And we also have a report, and the information that was gathered today and yesterday at this workshop will be put into a report. But that's not the end of it. Next slide. So I think that's it for my slides. Yes. So I'm glad that we're all here, because it's not just the federal agencies, ASCE membership and leadership, and university researchers that are here, but I'm really excited to see folks from the insurance, from the finance, and banking and bonding, because we have to broaden the groups that we are connected to, that see the value of providing resilient infrastructure, because there's strength when you all can walk in lockstep and talk to decision makers, and how we can then maybe work together to actually provide that resilient infrastructure. So I'm going to hand the podium over to our first panelist, Bilal Ayub.
Thank you, Norma Jean. The title of the session is Working Together. I don't think it's an option, it's almost a requirement. The challenges will require us that we have to work together to deal with future hazards and climate projections and so on. I don't think it's doable without the engagement of reliable source for such information such as NOAA. To make decisions, I don't think it's possible without engaging the economists and figuring out the finance piece. To do all of this, I don't think it's possible without the legal and the policy dimension. So I mean, working together is not an option, it is required. The nature of the challenge will make working together necessary. I mean, I tried, we have 3 panelists. I thought I'll cover more of the engineering side, basically working together, focusing on the civil engineering practice and so on. We did since signing the MOU, we had a series of workshops, and the focus was from the engineering side to define what are the needs. And you are familiar with that. I don't want to repeat it. But basically, we did identify 4 hazards that were our initial focus. Extreme temperature was one. Rainfall, extreme precipitation that could lead to flooding. Coastal storms was another, and then we have wind. And we did make a lot of advancement in this area. There are very specific, we have very specific recommendations in terms of the needs and so on, and we heard earlier in different panels and sessions about the efforts that are going in ASCE standard committees. So all of this is in motion, as well as we established those channels of communication with NOAA. In the past, I mean, NOAA with this, as well as ASCE, both of them organizations with their own complexity. I mean, if you're not familiar with them, you might find it to be challenging and intimidating to figure out where to go and so on. They are all this matrix organization, complex setting, which is necessary because of the challenges or because of the services that they provide. But at the present, I could say that there are links that could be strengthened. So we did. So basically, we provided input to NOAA about the needs, as well as we received basically information, identified offices, individuals. We made introductions, and most importantly, one of the items which I think it was a major item for us as a profession is a grant program. I mean, there is a series of projects that were funded, Type 1 and Type 2, under the MAP program, and a lot of it is put in place and is secured to some extent, so far not being affected. Even the next round of funding, it has been, it's in the process of being awarded. It was at risk, and maybe it's beyond that stage of being at risk. So all of this is good news. So all of these, I think, were informed by the needs of our community. IPG, the whole notion and so on, it was brewing, but the interest from our community made the case for NOAA to actually create such settings and so on. It was very encouraging. So all of this was achieved. The NOAA products, we are trying to shape, the future NOAA products in some aspects of them to meet our needs. I mean, we have the cafe, the information cafe, which I encourage you to visit if you have not done so. The business case, as I mentioned at the beginning, at the very end, we have to figure out how to do things, and economics plays a major role in it, and finance as well. So we had all, one of the focus in this workshop was on the business case, and we tried to cover all of them, all the items that you see in here, basically from the hazard impacted reduction strategies, more in the engineering side. We covered that in this workshop. Technologies. I think I was in Last year, I visited the USAID office in Pakistan. It was in November. And it was their 75th anniversary of having that office, all eliminated, by the way. Big history, long history in building a lot of infrastructure, mostly water-related transportation and power in Pakistan. And at one time, it was also much more expanded in the billions of dollars during the war and so on. And what's unique in there, that they were starting to see the effect that that program might not exist in there. And we had a panel of how can you achieve resilience in an economically challenged area, and we could actually learn from it, right? Is through innovation and technologies. I think whenever there is challenges like what we are facing now, basically future hazards, the storms that we heard about and so on, and the recent experiences, innovation in technologies will open up new markets, right? So I think if we approach it that way, it is an opportunity for innovation, new materials, it could be AI technology, a new use of sensor technology, data reduction and analysis, AI, and so on. All of this will open up markets which will lead to economic growth and so on. And I think that's a strategy which is being adopted at least in that visit, as well as with MCC experience, which we had similar type of challenges in work in Mozambique and Sierra Leone. And if you link it to economic development, then you could build the business case, innovation, right? So I think it will be central component of this. We heard about the finance, which was very interesting in terms of the bond rating and so on. I added one item of my own in there, which is infrastructure tokenization. I mean, there was an interview recently by, I think in April, with Larry Fink. He is the CEO of BlackRock. And he talked extensively about asset, including infrastructure, tokenization. So basically, you could have a future infrastructure system which will have a token, and it will be publicly traded. So you could, with little friction, you could invest into a bridge or into a network system. And they think this is the growth, this is the future, right? Which lend itself for basically automated transactions, whatever the transactions are, whether it's use of infrastructure and so on. So I could see all of this will come together. I think that's where you could have economic growth, opportunities for economic growth. So I think we have to think about it that way. So working together, as I said at the beginning, it's not an option, it's required. The challenges facing us will require us that we will work together. And I'm very excited about this. I think we are on the right track, and thank you.
So thank you. So our next panelist, I'd like to invite Amanda McCarty. So the floor is yours, Amanda. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Norma Jean. I'm going to leave my video off since you can see a picture of me. It just makes it easier, I think. Remote access is always awkward. So anyway, what I'm going to talk about is a little bit more about the co-development and supporting the use of these tools, data, services, and information. It's really important to start with what we're hearing from the users. And I think, as we talked about the business case over the last couple of days, we really clearly heard about the costs. So poor infrastructure costing American families about $3,300 every year, just from things like failed power grids, high utility costs. The 13-to-1 return on investment that the Chamber and Allstate highlighted as, the benefits of this. We also know that these losses are growing, and we're hearing about these challenges of insurance companies experiencing losses of 120% year after year, and how unsustainable that could be if it continues. And then, we started to think about how, well, if insurance isn't accessible, then the risk is really truly shifting to other sectors of the market, things like banks, investors, or to individuals and communities. So there's some really big changing dynamics here about how users are thinking about their risks and what we can do to support resilient infrastructure. And I think it really demonstrates how smart investments that help improve resiliency are can reduce burdens on families. They can lower insurance losses. They can lower community risks. They can lower financial risks. And so we have this broad stakeholder group together here today, representative entities. And you know, in listening to what everybody said, there were a couple things that came through pretty clearly. So first of all is that, you know, we've done a fairly good job to sort of qualitatively explain some of these risks. We do have some modeling tools about physical risks, like the ones you just heard from Tom at GFDL highlight, and tools that NIST have developed, and catastrophe models. Although I did like the framing of them as some that are not good, some that are better, and some that are useless. I'd love for us to get beyond that, right? But we really need some better quantitative tools. We probably also still need some better qualitative tools for some hazards that we haven't done as well at thus far. And so really understanding specific user cases and what data, tools, information, models are needed will allow us to better help each of those components of our stakeholder community to make the case, but also make decisions in light of what's going on. I think it's really clear that in this room there are common interests between these different communities, and bringing together partners is how we're going to move the needle forward. I imagine that just based on the way the conversation went, we won't always agree on prioritization of interests, but given we have shared goals, we can definitely move forward together, each contributing the expertise, the experience, the perspectives that we have. And so I think that another key finding that I heard over and over again was the need for educated citizens and decision makers who can advocate for what's needed. So this will be identifying additional beneficiaries and why it matters to them, and how we can build out data, tools, information, and services that meet those needs. A key area where I think we have a tremendous amount of potential is in the insurance and banking stakeholders, who clearly want more and better building standard options and adoption. They want better forward-looking data, site-specific risk data, and that will help to, you know, characterize the risks for various investments. And so, you know, where NOAA sits on this is we have been trying to work with these communities. I think what you heard today was that, you know, we have, and yesterday, and hopefully saw in the Tools Cafe, our industry proving grounds is really trying to take us forward with 20 products in development. You know, the storm event database, the events catalog, wind climatology, and others. Our geophysical fluid dynamics laboratory is really pressing the geospatial and temporal resolution of physical risk data. We have experts across the agency in things like sea level rise, in wildfires, who are building on our longstanding work in predicting and applying tools and warnings that we have been doing for temperature and precipitation and flooding and hurricane and storm events for a long time. So we're getting better at the things that we've done for a long time, but we're also trying to expand into new and emerging and expanding hazards, or hazards in new places where they haven't been. I think there's tremendous opportunity to think about creative new partnerships. I'm thinking of, you know, our colleague from the U.S. Green Building Council, who talked about LEED building certifications, and how resilience is being introduced into that, and how, you know, the real estate community is another subgroup that we could bring on as a stronger partner in this work. And then, you know, thinking about sort of some of the bonds and lending practices that could push or reward sustainable and resilient building and renovations, and how that could help to encourage the adoption of more resilient standards. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity to look at this ecosystem, and you can tell I'm an ecologist by training, because I think in terms of networks, right? It's like, which levers can you push? Which levers can you pull? There's tremendous opportunity right now to really get some key wins with some really critical pivot points that we haven't been able to in the past. So I guess I would end by saying, you know, NOAA is committed to continuing the science, to continuing the partnership with the American Society of Civil Engineers and the broader engineering and architecture community. And, you know, we also really need to be thinking about how we can bring in additional partners that we've been cultivating over, you know, the past couple of years, and dive deeper on linking infrastructure with things like retail, and with things like insurance and reinsurance, and with finance and so on, and with our community leaders. And I, you know, even on the last panel, the Department of Transportation, it just so happens that I also lead NOAA's engagement with the Department of Transportation. So these are all things that we can pretty easily bring together. And I think that, you know, as I look to the future of this partnership, those are things that I have at the forefront of my mind. I'll turn it over to Dan, or back to Norma Jean, and then to Dan. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda. So Dan, floor is yours.
Thank you, Norma Jean. Well, what a difference a year makes, right? I don't know how many of you were here a year ago and we were practically giddy with the opportunities that were in front of us. Now we're a little more sober. And that's what I want to talk about. I think there is an opportunity here. You know, if obviously many of you are aware, the level of federal service that we were kind of hoping for is in question. And so, you know, we have to understand what really is important. How do we work together to advocate for the programs, the data collection, the data processing, the data access, the significant scientific expertise that we've grown to appreciate through some of the work we've done over the last couple of years? How do we ensure that that stays around? I think that's really the big challenge for us. So what I'd like to do, just for I've got a couple slides here. I'm going to offer some thoughts, and then I think we're going to try to do some discussion. But to me, there's really three areas I think we need to do a better job, develop a better understanding. The first is, how does engineering practice, especially codes and standards, how does that really increase resilience, especially in financial terms? I think we all, at a qualitative sense, understand, and that's why we're in this space, that's why we advocate for codes and standards. But I think making this business case, which was kind of the intent of this workshop, was to help us understand what's the challenge there. That's what's going to be key. I spent 3 years in the Bush administration. Every day was a discussion with somebody from OMB or our own economic folks at OSTP, making the case for some science program. What does this science program really bring to us that we wouldn't otherwise have? How do we put it in terms that have economic value? You know, that's the game you play when you're going to make decisions based on economic outcomes. So I think what I see emerging is this greater emphasis on, we do need to move to more quantitative, we need to move to more economic arguments, financial arguments. I see the emerging role of NIST on the task force as a huge plus for us. The first couple years of the task force was about bringing climate scientists and civil engineers together to understand each other's capabilities and problems. Now, as we try to advance that argument, as we try to ensure that these products and services are available to support civil engineering practice, we've got to make that economic argument. And NIST, I think, is just such a tremendous partner in that. We've got to evolve our thinking a little bit, but we've got to make that business case. And I think what you saw from some of the panels, that business case is going to be different depending on what kind of economic player you're talking to. The bond market, they're talking 30, 40 years. That's our sweet spot, right? That's where civil engineers live. We want to design something that's going to live and be in service for 30 to 100 years. So clearly, we need to understand how climate is going to evolve. If you're talking to the insurance industry, well, their primary need is to price, right? They need to understand what their exposure is going to be for the next couple years and to try to establish their pricing accordingly. They recognize the long-term value of oh, well, you know, if this community was more resilient, our losses would be decreased, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, there's state regulators that they have to deal with. You can't just price your insurance product based on your risk. It's just not the way it works because the regulators have a say. So we have to understand these different sectors, what their needs are, and how to communicate with them. And I've been doing in and out of this space now for more than 10 years, and every time I have a conversation with somebody like Terry Smith or Robin or others, I'm learning something new because it is so diverse and the processes are so complicated. It's just going to take us a while to get to that comfort level, I think. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, and I think as we go forward and we try to build a coalition that's going to advocate for everything from data sets, environmental data sets, to new products and services, et cetera, we have to really begin to understand what are the actions that need to take place, and who are the actors that are going to take those actions. It's one thing to stand up in front of 30 people and say, somebody needs to do X, right? But unless somebody says, I will do X, it ain't worth anything, right? So we have to understand, I thought the incentive discussion that we had with the National Institute for Building Safety or Science was really a good discussion, but it needs to go to the next level. I still think that we have a tendency to just fall back on, oh, well, the federal government will ensure that this information is available, right? Or the federal government will cover our losses if they exceed a certain threshold through FEMA. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not sure that's a safe bet anymore, right? So I think it's this really understanding, how do we incentivize certain actions and who can provide that incentive. I think there's a lot of space there for us to explore, both as a task force and as a community. So, working together, what is that like? Oh, I've got 2 number 1s. I guess I couldn't make up my mind. The other area that I think that we need to spend some time on is, I see a path for working with different federal agencies. I mean, just over the course of the 2 days, I've had great discussions with people from federal highways, from, I mean, I think we know kind of how to maybe bring those folks together around civil engineering practice. But I think the other thing we need to do is we need to give more thought to what other entities need to be at the table. ASCE 728 is going to be a huge product for ASCE, just as it always is. It's really going to set a tone for how to deal with uncertainty, how to deal with climate in the future. But what's federal highways doing? What's DOT through the National Highway Cooperative Research Program, through AASHTO? How are they dealing with these issues? We're just now starting to have conversations with them. How else, what other areas of civil engineering practice need to be involved? Do we work with ASHRAE? How do we build a coalition of people that can advocate for the data and information that we need to act as civil engineers? I think we've got to be more progressive in trying to reach out to those groups, and I suspect, given the current climate, they may be more receptive. I mean, clearly ASTM, I don't know whether you all understood all of that, but Holly Niebuhr, who chaired the session yesterday, and Willie Akami, I met them through an ASTM subcommittee, okay? ASTM is looking to work in this space and to work with us. So I think there's an opportunity. I think it's going to require leadership. I think ASCE can provide that leadership, but we can't go it alone. And so I want to echo what Bilal said. This isn't an option now. This is an absolute need. All right. So I think then Norma Jean, you want to manage the Q&A, and those are my comments.
I have a couple of questions that I can throw out, unless we want to go to the audience immediately. Let's see. We got a little bit of time. So the first question, and I think it could be thrown at all 3 of you, maybe starting with Amanda first, then Bilal, and that gives you, Dan, a little bit of time to catch your breath. Although we have significant technical capacity in science and engineering for supporting infrastructure resilience, there are still gaps. So what are the most significant technical advances that we still need? So Amanda, you first.
Sure. So I think from my perspective, it's starting to do some of the translation of pulling together historic data with forward-looking model data, integrating physical risk data and socioeconomic data. And I think one of the biggest challenges is getting data to talk to each other and integrating them in a way that people can understand it. So the technical challenges of sort of data integration, so that you can look at something and literally, if you are an expert, you can spend less time on it. But if you're not an expert, you can actually use data and information to understand how the future might look different than the past. And that you can do that in probabilistic ways if you need to. You can do that in more qualitative ways if you need to. You can develop scenarios based on, you know, the extremes with uncertainty characterized. But I really think, you know, that data integration is a huge challenge from everybody I talk to. The users I talk to often have to put together 6 or 7 different things to make sense of anything. So I'd say that's by far the biggest challenge. And then I'd say the next biggest challenge is that some of these hazards, particularly the compounding hazards, right, like temperature and precipitation, tend to be easier, right? But if you're talking about drought, it's more complex. If you're talking about wildfire, it's even more complex. And so I think the other area of technical challenges is how we advance the research and advance the modeling and advance the observations so that we have better, you know, local in situ data. We can't just depend on satellites alone, and we can't just depend on AI alone. I know everyone wants to, but that's just not going to work. So getting that in situ data expanded at the level that we need to, advancing the research to fill key gaps, and you know, advancing the modeling around particularly those compound hazards. That's an area where I'm really excited to see where things go, and I'm seeing tremendous progress through things like NOAA's Precipitation Prediction Grand Challenge, through our wildfire forecasting efforts, through things I'm seeing out of the private sector as well. And so I'm hopeful too. Thanks.
Thank you. So Bilal, to you.
I think building on what Amanda said, data information is key for us. I don't think we have adequate level of data, just a matter of how can we make it more accessible and making this information flow almost seamless and customized to meet the needs. And we are, part of our work in the MAP funding, some NOAA funding, is that we are trying to work on this information flow. We have to make it ideally coming from the source, maybe it could be NOAA, all the way to the hazard tool, and presenting it in really meaningful terms to an engineer. So there are many pieces they have to be put together, but the information is there. It's just a matter of how can it be creating that pipeline for it and presenting it in meaningful terms. That's one. The second item I'll say is systems thinking. When we have very complex system of systems like Sissy, what she talked about, and identifying the critical systems and components and so on is key in this complexity. And what should guide us is impact on the community. And at the very end is about people, right? Which means that, which comes to the third item that I have, that when we define an infrastructure, we can't just simply define it as the material that we put on the ground defining the bridge or the transportation system, but it should be the transportation system with the people, the environment, and the economy, all together defined as one. And if you bring that, as this is one project, and if you bring it as systems of systems, a system of systems, and you are trying to allocate resources, and we have limitation on that, then it becomes not a simple decision-making process. Which one, equity and many other considerations will be applicable, and determining the benefit will become non-trivial and so on. So we need that. We need to make more advancement in that direction. I know it's very complex when you think about it that way. And just to give you some context to it, I serve on a board for the National Academies. It's the Board on Environmental Change and Society, BICS for short. And this is not part of the engineering, it's part of the sciences, and it falls under social science, right? So they asked me to lead some workshop last year. It's on public infrastructure. And their motive, social science, right, mostly social scientists, they want to define the public infrastructure to include the environment and the people and the economy. They think that's the way it should be defined, which I totally agree. We held a workshop. There is a proceedings and a brief on the outcomes of the workshop, and it was attended by almost 200 people. So I think we need to think that way. We have to approach it in this manner. This system of systems thinking will complicate things, but we need to make some advancement in that direction, simplify it, simplify it, when you have complexity, one way to simplify it is to basically align it with the people who are the decision makers and the players or the beneficiaries, right? When we simplify it that way, then we could maybe make more sense of it to inform our decisions.
Thank you. How about you, Dan?
Well, I mean, Amanda and Bilal did a great job of covering it. I'm kind of coming around more and more to this is really a communication challenge. Maria, you know, I could parrot half of her talk. I wouldn't be able to do it, but if I could, I mean, there are so many aspects of this, whether it's workforce issues or contracting. I mean, the world is changing under our feet, and just going back even to this discussion of the business case, if insurers want to reduce their risk by providing coverage in areas that are more resilient, then somebody at that jurisdiction has to make a decision to either encourage or adopt hazard-based building codes that are based on sound engineering practice and standards. To get those in place, it takes 10 to 12 years. I mean, there's just so many things that I think we've been living off the fat of the land for the last 30 years, and it's all kind of catching up with us. And so how are we going to make all these changes in parallel? And I think the only way we're going to do that is for entities like ASCE to rethink our business model about, like, what do we really need our members to know? What are we doing to serve our members? I think the ability to, it's great that we develop these data sets or that we develop these standards, but we've got to do a much better job of putting that information in the hands of practicing engineers, understanding the limitations that practicing engineers have. And so, you know, I think ASCE has done a tremendous service to its 160,000 members, but we can't sit on our laurels. We have to find ways to get this information out, to make sure it's being used, so that then when we need the membership to help us advocate for change in practice, they understand where it's coming from. So I think it's really about communication, internal, external, into these new economic groups. It's going to be a heavy lift, but I think ASCE is in a position, working with our federal partners, to be a change agent. And that's what I'm hoping that we see coming forward.
Well, yeah.
I have another thought, which is how can we prepare through education? How can we prepare a future specialist who could deal with this complex setting? I mean, I look around the room, and I'm delighted that I know a good number of you. I mean, I see in the room engineers who think of themselves as being based in engineering, but they are comfortable in the finance domain. Engineers who think that they could do some microeconomic modeling and so on. And you could see some economists who think, well, I know enough about engineering and so on that I could make an impact. And I could see finance people who would aspire to be an engineer, right? Which is really, it's really a unique mix. Not everybody is like that. I mean, there are some people who are engineers and they are hardcore engineers, right? They know the steel and concrete and so on. And so you wonder if the people in this room, they are unique in that regard. Everybody followed the path. I was asked to introduce myself in this new group that I joined on the National Nature Assessment. And I didn't know, I was confused about how to introduce myself. So I thought I'll introduce myself. I started as a civil engineer. Right? And all of you, I think if you introduce yourself, you could start with the origin, and then you'll know that you followed your own path, right? Going back to my point about education. So how can we prepare our students, the future workforce, that they will be comfortable to venture in those dimensions? Because I think that's what it takes. And you know what I try to do? And I teach a course on probability and statistics, required course for civil engineers. And I really try to do that, to show them that we are dealing with uncertainty. It matters. It matters in every aspect of it, whether it's finance, economics, engineering, sciences. It's in everywhere, right? And I could see their comfort level, or they start to see themselves. They are not boxed in one field. Because those fields, the boundaries are not really, they are just made up by us. Right?
Yeah, thank you. I want to add a little bit to that, because I myself have taken a winding path. So 10 years in consulting after my undergraduate degree, then 30 years in higher ed, primarily doing structural engineering, but meandering into water policy and getting involved because Obama put me on the Mississippi River Commission. So serving 10 years in, wearing that hat, and then ultimately with Maria being on Biden's National Infrastructure Advisory Council. And when I wore the Mississippi River Commission's hat, we were prosecuting the Mississippi River and Tributaries project that most people don't really know much about, but it was started almost 100 years ago after the big flood of 27, and it encompasses parts of 6 states, so it's along the Mississippi River below St. Louis, where we no longer have locks and dams. We've got a free-flowing river. And Bilal, you said something that you didn't think that we needed more data. Well, the MRC commissioners always needed better data. We wanted better forecasting because water is moving down. It's a big watershed. And if we have a lot of rain, then we've got a lot of water coming down. And if it siphons all at the same time into the lower Mississippi, we have a huge crest. Now, the MRT project has, which protects a lot of communities and a lot of economic development along the river from Cairo, Illinois, all the way down. We no longer have the ability to control it, other than some relief valves. The New Madrid floodplain, we can open up that in Missouri, and then 2 hardened structures, the Morganza Spillway and the Bonnet Carré Spillway when you get into Louisiana. And water takes a long time to travel through a state. And so we need to know what the forecast, because as it's moving, it's gathering from other tributaries even more water. So we have to know how much water is going to impact that crest, so that is that crest going to be above the trigger point once it gets to a certain location from our first floodway, so that we can operate it, because it's not a trivial thing to operate these things. So better forecasting, which means better data. So the loss of data is concerning to me, because these big projects, people don't even know that they're being protected by them. And we need more data, better data, not less. So we have about 10 more minutes to 2:45. Is that, so we're not?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
Okay.
I think I'd be interested. We've had this captive audience for 2
Okay, yeah, and y'all have been extremely attentive and very quiet. So, do we have a mic? So, opening up to those persons here in the room and those online.
Yeah, Gary Ehrlich, National Association of Home Builders. I mean, you kind of touched on this with, some of your comments about, education, communication, and tools. But yeah, definitely, I think as I've been sitting here, the last day and a half listening, maybe the question to you is, thinking specifically about my member base is how do you provide the education and communication you're talking about, and then the tools, how do we put them in the hands of our members, my members, the members I represent, when I've got a membership that spans from the high production, publicly traded builders, like the Pulte's and the D.R. Hortons and the K. Hovnanians, who probably could implement some of these, or listen to, deal with some of these modeling or some of these complex insurance, options, down to like, we have a lot of, the majority of our members who are builder members, they're small family companies, and, build 2 to 5 homes a year, they would be challenged if you tried to put even some of the financial tools in front of them, let alone some of the engineering tools. So, how do we communicate, across that whole band of, of my stakeholders? This is probably similar to engineers too, right? I mean, what you can, what a, Simpson, Gumpertz, Hager, or Wisjeni, Elsner, or another multi-state or very large firm can do may be different than what, a small practitioner with, a couple of junior engineers and some draftsmen can manage. Interested in your thoughts.
Well, I think I could maybe answer the question, and depending on the age group, if I may call it, or the experience, when they finished college, right? If you are dealing with new graduates, we have to have a curriculum where many of the cross-cutting concepts are covered in many courses. We can't cover them. What we've done in the past, we'll have maybe probability and statistics, and then we could refer to it. I think it should be covered in many, many courses, and we have to do that in economics and so on. This is for basically students. For people who are at the beginning of their career, as well as other groups, I think maybe mid-career as well, we need to not only evolve our tools, but actually do disruptive changes to them. Because a lot of we have the technology from the IT and AI and so on, that the tools themselves do not require that somebody will actually go and do a deep dive in a book and so on. All that information should become customized for the specific needs that they have. If they are building in Chicago, they are building a certain type of structure, we should be able to have a building code that will basically tell them exactly what are the requirements that are applicable in a pull-down menu. It's almost a QuickBooks or Intuit product, but it's not for taxes, but for building, right? For the more senior ones, sometimes you just give them incentive to retire.
Well, I just got to point out, speaking for our builder members, you've already lost some of them at that point. Because I'm sitting on a base of members. A lot of them, at best, they have maybe a construction management course. Or sorry, they might have a construction management degree from a school with a construction management program. They may be very intelligent, but very savvy, commonsensical, common sense, intelligent, learning kind of person, but they still may be sitting primarily on high school degree and years of experience, at, their father's working for their father with some maybe community college, and that's their education basis. So what you just went into is great for maybe an engineering student, but for my constituents, you got to be even simpler than that.
Yeah, no, I fully understand. I think you have to rely maybe on product that is visual, where a lot of the maybe technical depth will be behind the code, right?
Gary, I have something to add. So there are certain products, such as fortified roofs, that make sense from a builder's perspective, but maybe they might not think that, and an potential owner's perspective, because it can lower their insurance costs. And so if the builders can look at fortified roofs and say, hey, a little bit more of a cost, we have to learn how to put these roofs on, because it's not the same old roof, but it provides you a product that might be more attractive to homeowners.
If I may add, I understand the context better now. I mean, I could see, for example, products that will become more of a catalog, right? So if you want resilience, if we have the rating system,
right,
you want resilience rating 2, then that's the product you'll use. I dealt with a company, Ohio Bridge, I'm not sure if it exists now, where they give you, from the catalog, bridges. You want certain span, certain load, you don't need to design it, you just pick up from the catalog. In fact, in the work that we did for MCC in Mozambique, they wanted a temporary bridge in a certain area, and that's exactly what we selected, is pick up from the catalog.
So Robin, I think you're next.
Robin, is it on?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Robin Kemper. The hat I'm wearing here is SEI, ASCE, but I do work for Zurich, the insurance company. Bilal, I didn't think you were that old. That you it's a long time since they used catalogs to pick out bridges, I thought, 100 years or more. But mine's very granular, very quick. It was your slide, I think, or somebody's who raised a concern and question. It's the fact that what role, I don't have a clear enough understanding, does University of Maryland playing in this cooperative, in this task force, and the fact that the agreement is ending, should it be ending, or should we be considering continuing it? But first, what's the role, and then is there a need to continue that?
Good question.
Dan, would you like to, I'm happy to answer, try to answer it, or would you like?
Go ahead, and then
Okay.
I'll
You'll add.
amplify or
Okay.
correct.
All right. The University of Maryland, the role of the University of Maryland in the way it's described in our agreement with NOAA. We have a cooperative agreement with NOAA, and we have a letter of support from ASCE. So we have, and there is an MOU between ASCE and NOAA, right? So our agreement with NOAA, University of Maryland is viewed as a boundary organization, which will facilitate the work between NOAA and ASCE. And we had basically 2 years. We started with 2 years of funding. It's a funded agreement. And then it was renewed for 2 more years, which will expire at the end of August.
Yeah, I guess I'll just kind of amplify a little bit. The concept was, I worked, when I was at NOAA, I was in the climate program office. And part of the portfolio that I managed at that time was the Regionally Integrated Science and Assessment Group, which is now CAP, which is the Climate Adaptation Program. Okay, excellent. And that's what they did. They were funded groups that kind of worked between NOAA or other federal science programs and then local decision makers. And that was the concept. And they had different foci depending on what part of the country they were in. So when Bilal and I met with Ben D'Angelo to talk about the genesis of this, it was kind of the concept was, well, maybe this is more of a sectoral version of that, where you have ASCE, very complicated, very matrixed, lots of silos. You've got NOAA, very complicated, very matrixed, lots of silos. How do you get those two groups to work together? And so that was the concept, that we would do it for a limited part of time, a limited length of time, and then the training wheels would kind of come off and the two organizations would work together. That was the benefit of some funding. We're not talking much funding here, so don't think Bilal and I are driving Corvettes or anything. Most of it went to supporting, like Megan Edwards. NOAA provided support for Megan to provide a secretariat. So I think we're at a point where really ASCE and NOAA need to kind of, rethink how things are going. You heard Amanda, she's very dedicated to keeping this working, but it takes a lot of conversation and a lot of interaction. And, I probably in the span of a week talk to somebody from NOAA at least twice a week, different offices, different line offices, different programs, or I'm talking to individuals who've gotten involved in the task force and they're looking for information at NOAA and they're like, Dan, I've been on the website, can you help me get a hold of somebody that knows X, Y, or Z? There's a lot of that. And it's been, it's been very rewarding, but at some point, we have to find some mechanisms to, what's the essential interaction? Are we going to continue to have task force meetings? Who's going to chair those task force meetings? Who's going to provide the secretariat? Who's going to do the newsletter? Which of these are really essential?
It's raining.
Wow. Weather changed quickly. So I mean, there's a lot here on the table, and I think part of it is bound up with ASCE strategic planning, ASCE resource allocations. There's a lot of work to do yet. I don't think Bilal and I are going to just sail off into the sunset, but there are some decisions that have to be made.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
So I don't know that I answered your question, Robin, but
you did, absolutely.
yeah.
And thank you for the clarification.
And you know, if I may add, I think we tried, Dan and I, we tried to use a style where we facilitate and encourage direct links between institutes and NOAA offices, and we'll step back from it. I mean, whenever we see an opportunity of this type, we are happy that it's happening. And we did facilitate good number of them.
Right. I think that just to tie that off, because of the changes taking place at NOAA, if you're from NOAA, you know all this, and I apologize if you find it awkward, but basically they did the same thing they would do in a major corporate restructuring. They encourage the older, expensive employees to retire, and then they fire everybody that's new, that's on probation because they have no status. That's right out of corporate restructuring playbook, right? So, but there's a core of very dedicated people that are continuing to be passionate about this work, but there's a lot of changes. They don't even know what changes are taking place. So I think it's going to be difficult to maintain the level of interaction that we've experienced without some additional effort. I think if things had taken place the way we thought they would a year ago, you know, we'd be in pretty good shape, but that's not the case.
Thank you. And I know we're over time, but I'd like, because we haven't had a chance to have a question from our online audience, and we do have at least one.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
we have one comment that I think is good and one question here. Maria Honeycutt says, I wanted to add to the discussion prompted by Gary at NAHB. The issues you raised about ensuring there are resources targeted to those with limited capacity and capability is prevalent across the ecosystem. This is critical. It's not just the design engineers. In the flood space, we're trying to develop tools that made, sorry, hold on. It got marked as answered, so it went away part way through reading it. In the flood space, we were trying to develop tools that made forward-looking flood information accessible to a variety of audiences inside and outside of government, including home builders. And what they developed was credible but unsatisfactory per some government experts, but we had to have something to support decision-making that could actually be used by someone without a PE, PhD, AICP, or so on. And advancing the TF goals required targeted resources for those user groups. And the question we have is from Chuck Chadovitz, who says, we're planning a congressional briefing on our report in the fall. What are some creative advocacy steps on which this group can collaborate, and are there other opportunities to bring together different sectors?
Yeah, exactly. A higher power. I just like to take a stab at that because those two things to me kind of make total sense together. And it goes back to even Gary's comment. I think that in terms of like building a broader tent, ASCE has done a pretty good job, I think, of understanding our needs as expressed through the standards. But like if we could work with other entities, you know, I think in most businesses, you know, at least in my consulting business that I'm involved in, you have people that have, you know, client-facing relationships, and then you have people that are more technical. If you can get a sense of what your clients need, but you need input, like if ASCE or our work with the federal family can help build that, then I think that's a conversation we need to have. But at the end of the day, obviously you have those relationships. You understand what their limitations are. You can do a better job of representing that in a discussion of like what's the next series of tools that really need to be put forward. So I think that's where, to me, the obvious kind of expansion of the tent is to get more of those perspectives in, see how they align with what we're already doing, and then think about what the next generation should be.
So thank you, and I think we should wrap it up. Okay, we'll take one more.
Hi, I don't want to keep everyone, so I can get the answer later.
Paul's got another 30 minutes.
And I think this
We're gonna just take it
weather
out of
will
his
not
time.
let us out, right?
Some of my time, no problem.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Falguni Patadia from NASA's Langley Research Center, and I'm excited we've been part of the task force from the Energy and infrastructure program at NASA headquarters. And my quick question was, going forward, what is the plan of this task force to engage these other agencies? Where do you see the role? Particularly because I'm seeing discussions around, the current environment. And also, there's been mentions of, data pipelines, integration, and different things. So there is expertise in terms of technical methods to bring about these pipelines. There's scientific expertise. There's complementary data sets. And I haven't seen that happen in the last year, so I'm just wondering what the plan is going forward to leverage some of these. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'll take a stab at that. The way the task force originally started, the fundamental concept was it was driven by the recognition that ASCE standards, as of like 2018, did not address climate change at all. That they might use the word in the text somewhere, but everything was based on the observational record. The methods were all based on the observational record. So therefore, it made it difficult to address non-stationarity. Whether that's a word or not, I'll leave that off. But it is a non-stationary system, and so civil engineers standards needed methods for doing that. So it was not, we're going to let 1,000 flowers bloom. I managed a $30 million research portfolio at NOAA. That's not what we're doing. I think Amanda alluded to this earlier. We started out with, what does the standard tell us we need about rainfall data, snowfall, et cetera? And then how do we build a product to deliver that? So now we're into a little bit different space where, I think we could expand. But this goes back to, I think, the times are going to be are tough, and there's going to be opportunities for the USGS, for NASA, for others that are developing capabilities to provide information about that and see if there's a better way to do something. The trick is we can't offer things to the engineering community and have them build capacity to use them and then say, well, okay, that research project's over, so we're not doing that anymore. So we have to do this in a way that's like sustainable.
I just want to add, at least for NASA side, that we have a huge applied science program, and some of our offerings, data and services, some of the things we offer are sustainable within NASA. So I saw Eric's presentation. He's got 5 years of data, but we have 40 years of data record that uses satellite data sets, and they are corrected by rain gauges, validated by us, and things like that. And we have value-added products that can be directly used by entities like ASCE. And there are things we could work with the task force to help them implement also. So even the knowledge transfer itself. So I am from the power project at NASA. We work with the energy and infrastructure communities as our end users. We work closely with ASHRAE, so we've got like 20 years of learning from them. We've developed all these TMYs and everything these building design codes need. So there's more to offer than just research, is what I want to say.
The task force meets every month. We put out a workshop report that identified all the civil engineering needs. So, if your group or another group has a product that you think is going to be useful, we're looking for speakers. So, not a problem.
And Dan, can I come, just one thing on this too, though? One of the things that I've gotten over and over again from users is, please not another tool. What we need is for you to integrate things and make it easier for them to use them together. So I would say, we absolutely want to bring in other tools, and we also need to, one of the things that I've been told over and over again is, please try and work more with your federal partners. We signed an MOU with the Department of Transportation. We have agreements with FEMA. We need to be doing more of this to make it easier on the users, instead of just saying, and here's another tool, and here's another tool. So we should be finding more tools, and we should be trying to integrate them to make them easier for the people, like our colleague was saying earlier, who don't maybe have a PhD or an engineering degree and want to use them. So I really think that it's important that we also think about our conversations going forward in the task force, to, build off of this about not just being single tools, but different tools and how we can integrate them and make them easier to use as a suite of tools. And what's the right tool for the right purpose, and what's the right data for the right tool, and so on.
Right. I think that, just to underscore Amanda's, it's about co-development. Okay? It really is about co-development. But if you have some data sets or something that you think are relevant, then let's talk about how to co-develop that into something useful.
If I may add, at the very beginning of our engagement with NOAA, we came up with a process which we called it user-to-user process, meaning you start from the user to know what are the variables that they are interested in, the design variables, and what are the needs specific and defined in the form of variables and unit of measurement and all of that, right? Very specific. And then we will go to see what's available from NOAA. And if that item is not available, it could be it's in their basically a repository of computer runs. That variable is pulled and summarized, condensed exactly to meet the needs of the user. And then we'll feed it back into the standard, right? So this user-to-user tool is really, process is essential. And the reason behind it, engineers are not researchers. There is no, like what Gary was saying, if you have a user who is maybe high school or 2-year college and so on, although very smart, right, they are builders, and if their needs calls for knowing whatever it is, the life expectancy of a product, or it could be what is the extreme temperature on an annual basis, then by season, then we need to present it that way, right? So if we could condense it to that level, certainly we welcome the participation. Maybe what could be done is let's communicate separately, and we'll figure out. Always we started, by having a brief to the co-chairs, and then it could be a brief to the task force, and we could build up that relationship. Thank you.
So I think we're going to end it, but because we have got to, you have to bring us home, Bilal. So please help me to thank our session 5 presenters.